Thank you, Dan. Thanks. Hello, everybody. It was about 10 years ago when I was writing my first book. I was a programmer, and I was programming heavy into it, probably for about 8 years. And then when I was trying to promote my book, I realized that I could not speak in front of other people. I could not give a presentation. I could not even do a radio talk show behind my own desk with my phone. I could not do it. That's when I realized more than ever that this presentation is needed. How to present a meaningful and powerful presentation for the scientist and the engineer. And I kind of threw researcher in there as well. Anybody basically who is more analytical, and we'll get to that, rather than somebody who tends to be very social and somebody who tends to like being around a lot of people. So the question, scientists, researchers, engineers are not generally associated with exemplary presentation skills, right? The question is this a justified stereotype? Well, okay, you answered my question. I did some research on this and there's a lot of evidence to support this. One such piece of evidence is from the Journal of Engineering and Technology Management in 2013. These researchers looked at the personality traits of 4,876 engineers versus 75,892 non-engineers. And here's what they found. Engineers scored higher on tough-mindedness and intrinsic motivation, meaning that, statistically speaking, you guys are probably here today because you want to be here, not because somebody's making you be here. Again, that's statistically. Some of you are probably here because you have to be. I understand that. But engineers scored lower on assertiveness, conscientiousness, customer service orientation, extroversion, and image management. These are some traits that can easily be associated with presentation skills. A lot of this is mostly anecdotal. When we have that stereotype that, okay, scientists, engineers, researchers, well, they're really not the best presenters in front of people. A lot of this is anecdotal, meaning that we kind of know this just because of the people we know. It's like, oh yeah, Rich over in research, this guy is, I've never seen him come behind his computer. He's always there. That's what we mean by anecdotal. There's also the fact that technical jobs tend to attract certain personality types. And technical jobs generally don't have the same level of communication, meaning that when we're in a technical job, a lot of times we're behind a computer, we're in our research, we're in a lab, and we're constantly doing this kind of work. The communication that we do very often, and again, I'm making generalizations here, so please don't say, hey, I'm not like that, or my job is different. Perhaps it is. As a general rule of thumb, the research and the work that we do and the communication we do is generally, a lot of it's email-based, and it's not as heavy as, say, like a sales position or somebody in management who's constantly communicating with other people. So it's very important to have good presentation skills for everybody, especially for us, the scientists, the researchers, the engineers. Here are some reasons. We want to get noticed. And we want to get noticed in a good way. If we want to get noticed, we could all just strip down to our underwear and run around the parking lot, right? We'll get noticed. But that's not what I'm talking about. We want to get noticed in a good way. We want raises. We want promotions. We want job security. We want to get funded. A lot of the work that we do is based on funding, money from other people. We have to get project approval. We want to be able to move forward in what we're doing. We want grants and we want financial backing. And we want to make a difference. We want not just to present our ideas, but we want to sell our ideas. So this presentation basically consists of 5 tips. I'm going to be giving you 5 tips for the scientist and the researcher. The first tip is actually made up of 5 sub-tips. And this first tip, this is probably the only one that's really generic for all kinds of public speaking. That's not just for scientists and researchers and engineers. So here's the 5 sub-tips of tip number 1, work on your basic public speaking and presentation skills. Have a clear point and get to it. Seems basic enough, but so many people have the floor and they get up here and they start talking, and even if you have unlimited time, you don't have unlimited attention. Your audience they're only going to give you enough attention for you to get your point across, so you have to have a point. You have to know what your point is, and you have to get to it. Have good eye contact. Look at everybody around the room. Communicate with people as humans As social creatures, this is how we communicate with each other. We connect with people by making eye contact. If you heard this rumor before, a wives' tale, that when you're giving a presentation, look over the person's head, don't look at people in the eye, it's bad advice, horrible advice. Look at people in the eye, it's okay. Prepare. Prepare for what you're doing. Don't come to a presentation thinking that you have it all set, because you probably don't. If it's in your head and you know what it is, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to communicate everything effectively. You have to prepare for your presentation, which ties us into the next one, practice. Practice is actually the verb of preparing. You want to practice. You want to go over your presentation. Like just this morning, I'm on the treadmill giving this presentation to myself, and my wife walks down. She thinks I'm nuts. But that's what it's about. It's about practicing. It's about verbally going over it, so you don't always get caught up as much when you actually go through your presentation. And have a backup plan. Most of the time, not most of the time things work out okay. But some of the time, and more often than we'd like to believe, things don't work out okay, especially when you're dealing with technology. For example, in my notebook, I printed out basically these slides, or just like the bullet points of these slides, and I have it on a piece of paper. So if something happened and the whole technology thing wasn't working, I'd at least have that piece of paper to go by, and I'd still be able to deliver this presentation. Maybe not as effectively without the visual component, but I was prepared for that. So be prepared. Have a backup plan. And get a book on public speaking or presentation skills. It's so easy to do, and it could have a dramatic effect in your presentations from this point on. One of the books that I strongly suggest is Dale Carnegie's book, Public Speaking for Success. It's a really good book. It's been around for a long time, great information. It's concise. It tells you what you need to know. If you're really not into reading, if you're more into kind of interactive stuff, well, take a course. There are plenty of online courses for public speaking that you could try. And there's also courses in real life. If you look up on the web, again, you could find courses in this area. If you don't want to commit to something long term, you just want maybe a one-day, a weekend course, there are plenty of options. And join Toastmasters. Toastmasters International is a wonderful organization. Many of you from here know there's two clubs, right? Two Toastmasters clubs at this organization in two different facilities. So you have plenty of options to join Toastmasters. You don't even have to leave the building, and that's pretty cool. I don't know if I want to get into, do they pay for it? And okay, forget about it. Ask Dan. Tip number 2, use presentation technology correctly. Technology exists to help sell your ideas, not to sell your ideas for you. You are the person that people are going to be looking at. You are the person that people are going to be paying attention to. So communicate with them as one human being to another. Sell your ideas to them. The technology should be there to back you up, to support you. Whatever you do, just don't put all of the information on your slide and just sit here and read your slides over and over and over again and expect people to do that. I got to tell you, if you don't want the attention on you, that's easy. That's the easiest thing to do, because people will generally look at the slides. It's a good way to get out of it, but you don't want to get out of the spotlight. You want to be in the spotlight when you're giving a presentation. You want to sell your ideas. Know how to use technology to prevent fumbling. Set up well ahead of time. Dan had me here half hour before. We were all set up after 5 minutes, but then a new wrinkle came in. Apparently, we have to connect to WebEx. So I had to completely undo everything I did, and we had to move everything over to a USB. So there was a lot of stuff going on, and basically we got everything set up within 5, maybe 10 minutes to spare. So it was a good thing that I came early. Otherwise, it would have been kind of a mess. We wouldn't be prepared. So get there early and set up ahead of time. Practice, make sure everything is working correctly. Use large fonts and photos that support the point of the slide. Obviously, I'm being ironic here. You probably can't read that, and if you could, that's okay. You want to use fonts that people could read, and that really depends on a lot of different factors, like how big the room is, how big the screen is, and the average age of your audience, too. There's a general rule of thumb that you would want to use a font size that's twice the average age of your audience. So if the average age of your audience is 40, you want to use like an 80-point font, right? You can do the math, it works out.
1 letter per slide.
And you want to use an image that really connects to the point of your slide. Otherwise, it's just going to be, okay, a cute puppy, hey, we all feel nice, but you don't remember the point. You don't remember what the slide is about. The image is supposed to be the visual component of the slide that impacts, that connects the message and gives a stronger impact, especially for memory. Tip number 3, acknowledge the curse of knowledge. This is probably one of my favorite ones for scientists and engineers. We are very smart people. Let's face it, we're brilliant. But not everybody is as smart as we are. And we have to know that we know a lot of things that other people don't know. Even our colleagues and people that study basically the same thing we do. And a lot of times we think that other people know what we do. So when we give a presentation on this information, we tend to talk very quickly over a lot of this information. We tend to assume that other people know what it is we're talking about. So we have to realize and we have to remember that other people do not know everything that we know. We have privileged information, and in order to communicate that information, we need to communicate it verbally and slowly sometimes. Avoid jargon that's not shared with your audience. Many of you probably have a lot of jargon here in the biotech industry that I would have no idea what it is. So if you were speaking to someone like me, you would have to get away from that jargon and explain it. Or another option is to use the jargon, but right after you use it for the first time, kind of in parentheses, not air quotes, I did air quotes, I'm in parentheses, say what it is. So now next time you use that jargon, we could associate that with the term. And slow down when talking tech. Allow time for questions. So if you're going over a presentation, and generally the majority of the presentation is kind of basic and most people understand, but you're getting to a very technical point. You're getting to something that most of your colleagues probably don't understand because maybe it's new research, it's a new discovery or something. Then that point, that's when you change the pace of your voice. You slow down a little bit. And perhaps you take more pauses and then ask for a verification. Say, okay, does everybody understand? You got that? Make sure that it's a two-way communication. Tip number 4, don't be afraid to use emotional appeals. I give a lot of presentations to very analytical, logical, reasonable crowds, like reason-based crowds. And a lot of my colleagues do the same, and I noticed that they're all focused on logic, reason, critical thinking, facts, and there's barely any emotional appeal to it. Now, there are pros and cons to this. First, we want information to be logically backed up. We want facts to back up what we're saying, right? We don't just want to give an emotional appeal. Emotional appeal is a fallacy, basically, when you make an emotional appeal and you have no facts to back it up. What I'm saying is you want to back up your facts with some kind of emotional tug. Because all of us, we think both rationally and we also think emotionally. Some of us, probably most of us in our room, are far more on the rational, logical side as scientists and researchers and engineers, statistically. But that doesn't mean we have to ignore the emotional appeals in our presentations. An emotion could be a very strong ally when it comes to persuasion. This is a wonderful commercial. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it before. It was in the Super Bowl about a couple years ago. Raise your hand if you've seen this commercial before. Okay, just a few of you. It starts out on a country road. We see this figure jogging in the background, coming closer to the camera. While this figure is jogging, you hear the narrator, the voiceover, in a very deep, monotone, kind of exciting, energizing type of vibe going on, talking about greatness and saying that it's not just reserved for a select few, but anybody could be great. Greatness is for everybody. And then as this figure gets closer, you see that it's an overweight 12-year-old boy really pushing himself. It's kind of like a little tearjerker, but it's a really great message. It kind of gives you the chills, and you're like, yes, great message. Again, it's that emotional appeal. We are emotional creatures. We connect to this, and we remember Nike because of it, and we have a good feeling of Nike because of it. There are two different thinking styles, essentially. One's intuitive and one's analytical. As scientists, researchers, and engineers, almost all of us tend to be more analytical. That means that we favor information that's factual, that's rationally based, and that we can understand logically. Whereas somebody intuitive might not really put so much weight on that side and emphasize that part of logic and reasoning. So what we want to do is we want to communicate with everybody. We want to communicate with people of both thinking styles. So we want to have that emotional appeal, and we want to attract the intuitive personality to our presentations. And the way we do this, if we don't have that ability, because many of us, we might think we do, but we probably don't, and that's okay, ask for help. We all have people in our families or some of our friends who are very intuitive and are very, they're not very analytical and reason-based, but they can connect emotionally. They might be able to take a look at our presentation and say, here, well, maybe you could throw this in here, and they'll give you some advice. Or maybe you'll have other friends or colleagues that are more intuitive, and they could help you. Maybe like people in the marketing department or friends in management or something. But ask for help if you don't think you're the type that could really bring some kind of emotional component into a presentation. And tip number 5, work with what you have. Be genuine. I think all of us would love to be like an Anthony Robbins, you know, that the guru who's an incredible presenter. He just goes up on stage. You just look at the guy and you feel all pumped up and excited. I mean, he's just that kind of personality. Very few people have that kind of presence, that kind of charisma. And the chances are, again, statistically, as scientists and researchers, we are probably not that type of person, and that's okay. Now here's a couple tips. One, you could try to be that person. Maybe you are that person, you just never kind of let that part out of you. So give it a try. Try to present something with a lot of energy and a lot of impact and running around the stage and see if that works for you. And if you realize, wait a minute, this is not me, I feel like a moron up there, I feel very self-conscious, I'm fake and people could see right through me, then that's fine. Be who you are. I've seen, Dan and I, and probably a lot of people here, have seen a lot of really good presenters who have probably the driest style. They'll go up behind the lectern or the podium and they'll just stand here the whole time, talk very monotone, but they have a very engaging voice. They may have a very dry sense of humor, and it's just amazing. They do a really good job. So there are different styles. You don't have to be that crazy type of energetic person. And I would probably even argue for a lot of technical presentations, that would be way overdoing it. It wouldn't be appropriate to run up with that little microphone coming from the door and have everyone cheer for you. Like, what the heck is this guy doing? That wouldn't work. So just be genuine. Be who you are. All right, so review the tips. Tip number 1, work on basic public speaking and presentation skills. A lot of tips out there. Google them. You'll find a bunch. If you do, get a book. That's wonderful. Join a club, a Toastmasters club. Do a weekend class somewhere. Dale Carnegie has a lot of weekend classes. Tip number 2, use presentation technology correctly. Set up ahead of time. That's probably the big key there. And know how to work your own equipment. Tip number 3, acknowledge the curse of knowledge. You're smart people. Don't assume that everybody else knows what you know. Tip number 4, don't be afraid to use emotional appeals. Bring some emotion in your presentation. It's okay. Tip number 5, work with what you have. Don't be fake. Everybody could spot a bad actor. Don't try to be a bad actor. Be who you are. So my final words will be based on this ad about finding your greatness, because that's what I think this presentation is about. Plus, I also want to take my own advice and get an emotional appeal here. So you guys start crying and clapping and, oh, Bo's the best. And I'll quote, because greatness is not in one special place, and it's not in one special person. Greatness is wherever somebody is trying to find it. Nike. Thank you.
We have about 7 minutes for questions. You want to take questions?
I just wanted to make one sort of an add-on to some of your comments that I think a lot of technical people do. They sort of equate data with knowledge, and it's the same thing. Data is just a bunch of data. If you really want to get your point across, you have to convey the knowledge and what you understand behind it. That's one of the things I try to do.
Right. And in science, we basically refer to that as synthesizing the data. You want to take all the data, synthesize it, and communicate it in such a way that it makes sense to the people around you. Good point. Any other questions, comments? Calvin?
Share a couple examples on how we can, as presenter, read our audience's respond and maybe react on that to bring them back to the presentation.
Okay, very good. Basically, communicating. A presentation is communication. When you're giving a speech, it's a communication. It's not one way, it's two-way. And I do this all the time. I actually teach psychology at a local university, and one of my techniques is to make sure that I'm looking at my class the whole time and I'm reading them. If I see that they're starting to like doze off and putting their head down or pulling out their devices, which by the way, I tell them that they could use their devices as much as they want. I don't have a rule against that, because if I'm not interesting enough, if I'm not more interesting than their device and they're texting, I'm doing something wrong. So I say, go ahead and use it if you have to, just don't distract other people. So I basically am communicating with my class without them actually saying anything, by looking at their faces, by understanding what they're doing. And if I see people starting to doze off, well, I change something, and maybe I'll speak louder, or I'll say, okay, let's pause this for a second, and let me show you a video, or let me do something else. So I change it up. In a presentation, maybe that's a good time to ask questions. That's a good time to say, okay, I ran over a lot of information right now, so does anybody have any questions? So bring everybody back to you, and then go on and continue. Yes?
Well, how would you, or what advice would you give for if you're trying to give a presentation and there's a wide range of levels, knowledge of what you're speaking about, and you're not sure how much detail you should go into versus glossing over the things and using the
That is a good question. One of the first things that you really need to do is know your audience. Know the level of education, of how much knowledge they have on your topic, more importantly, because that's what it's really about. And if you feel that there is a wide range of knowledge base on the topic you're talking about, pretty much go with the lowest common denominator. But because you're playing a tricky game there, because you could kind of put the people who know all what you're talking about, you could kind of put them to sleep. They could be boring to them, but you're going to lose the people at one end of the spectrum if you talk over their heads. And if you talk in the middle, then you could be isolating both sides. So you probably want to head towards more of the lowest common denominator, and maybe acknowledge the fact that, okay, look, I understand there's a lot of varied information in here, so I'm going to go over a lot of the basics. So I hope that those of you who understand and already know this stuff could just put up with me while I kind of go over some of this information. So maybe acknowledge it, and so they're saying, okay, I know what to expect now.
Well, how do you manage the hijacker? So
The hijacker.
you put all your preparation into this great presentation, and then you get in, and then...
So that's a great question. Let me tell you how.
That was good.
That's one way. Go ahead and finish.
Oh, I thought I had. And it happens here. A senior person in the room will step into your presentation, and suddenly it's going someplace you never intended it to go.
Exactly. And one of the techniques is to be the stronger personality. And sometimes that's tough for a lot of us. But as somebody's talking, say, that's great. That's a wonderful question. And kind of if you have to interrupt them, if you feel like they're kind of dragging it on and taking over the spotlight. So that's one technique. And I know some people may feel, well, that's kind of rude. And it may be, but it's also rude for somebody to hijack your speech. But this way is definitely effective. Sure. Or have somebody like Dan, like a moderator, do the dirty work for you, and say, okay, so just to sum up, what's your question exactly? So Dan could say that, so you could still look like the good guy, or the speaker could look like the good guy, and Dan could be the jerk that everybody looks at. Yes. I like that. Yes.
Good cop, bad cop.
So I understand practice and being prepared is not great to really come up with a good presentation. But then after that is the question.
Right.
No one can anticipate it. How do you really answer that well? Take topics you can do theoretical mathematics and understand take topics and do that well. But how do you really?
It's probably a lot easier than most people think. Like, how do you handle the question and answers like I'm doing right now? If you know the material very well, it's just like talking conversationally. And you're just answering from information that you already have. So it could be pretty easy. If you don't know the information too well, that's when people get very nervous about the question and answers. And if you are just learning the information and you're not really comfortable with that, if there's a way to say, I'll take all your questions like offline afterwards, then do that. And remember, you could always reserve well, that's a great question. I don't have the answer right now, but if you talk to me after, I'll get back to you with that answer. So you always have that in your back pocket if you need it.
So, in a lot of things we do, the presenter is not at the center of the presentation, the information is. Do you distinguish the two?
Yes. Yes, and that's a good point too. Like with a lot of technical and science, it's not about the presenter, but it's really about the information. But I would argue that there's there's not much of a difference because you are representing that information. The information, again, should be coming from you, and it should be sold by you, as opposed to sold by the technology. So you want to communicate the information, you want to communicate it well, but you don't want all the focus to be on the technology. So, yeah, I could see what you're saying there.
We're running out of time.
Okay.
So Bo, thank you very much for
Yeah, thank
taking
you,
the
Dan.
time to be here.
Thanks for
today.
having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.